All right, we're on, team.
Okay. Hey, everybody, it's Pat Jones. Thank you for joining us today. You can see we have a plethora of experts ready to talk about getting started early on your disease control strategies. Hang with us for one more minute. We'll let a few more people come in and then we'll get started. So be patient. A reminder, you'll be able to ask questions too. So if you have a question in mind, or if you want to think of a question now for one of our esteemed experts, this is a chance to kind of ponder on that and think about what you want to ask when we start the webinar. Okay, everybody, we made you wait long enough. It's time to get started on our webinar brought to you by the folks at BASF. And the topic today is strike early and stay strong. You know, what can you do this spring? What can you do right now to make sure that you're going to have a good, clean year and not look back and think, if only I'd done X. So this is your chance to ask about X. With me today, Dr. Rick Lattin, retired from Purdue University, a legend of the industry. Dr. David McCall, in no way retired, and very active with Virginia Tech's great Turfgrass program, and our friend Kyle Miller, who is the internal technical genius behind BASF's turf products, and of course support from you all. So with that, I'm going to let you see everybody. Wow, look at all those folks who've joined us. That is awesome. So again, if you have questions to ask or anything like that, please think about them. And as we continue to have people join us, the very first thing I want to do is to kind of take the pulse of what's going on this spring so far. And I think we have to allow the emeritus professor from Purdue University, Dr. Rick Lattin, to talk about what you're hearing and seeing both back in your old stomping grounds up north and even around Pinehurst where you live now. What are you hearing about this spring and disease presence?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Pat, and I appreciate the BASF folks for inviting me to participate in this. I always enjoy mixing it up with superintendents, so it's a special treat for me. Yeah, so from my perspective, I still have relatives and we still meet in the Midwest. So in the lower Midwest and actually throughout the northern tier, we've had more than our share, I believe, of freeze-thaw cycles. And I think that the microdochium patch remains a threat. If we keep looking forward in the spring, and I just looked at the 10-day outlook across the lower Midwest, I think the microdochium could still be active for a while. Maybe not, it's probably important on new bentgrass fairways, but if we have scars on greens from the pink snow mold, they could become active. So, we can't really look into the future, but I think the key word is preparation, and we should be prepared for our regular complement of diseases and understand our history and when we should address them.
So those pink snow mold scars, those are points of entry then for the pathogen to come in. Is that why that's relative?
Well, the pathogen is going to produce spores around the perimeter of those scars. And if it's on a green, those spores are going to be washed down the slope of the green. In fact, you'll be able to tell how a ball would break just by the infection that occurs sort of downstream from those scars.
Okay, perfect.
They occur
David,
throughout May, really.
Okay. Yeah. And what's the timeline that you're looking at for getting something like that under control now? I mean, what's your recommendation?
If the scars are out there now, then this would be a good time to really to prevent further infection in the greens. And I wouldn't address a fairway situation unless it was very juvenile bent grass. But yeah, I think it would be critical to address it on the greens.
That's a great point. With all the renovation and reconstruction that's going on out there, lots of folks have new bent grass. So I think that's a good thing to think about. David, how about you? You're in Southern Virginia, but you kind of keep your eye on the transition zone and down into the Southeast. What are you seeing thus far in 2026?
So the two things that come to mind right now are yo-yos and pollen. So
Okay.
As far as the yo-yos, our temperature fluctuations have been so dramatic this year, 50 plus degrees in a single day, it seems like. Right now, we are looking at low 90s in a good part of Virginia and across the mid-Atlantic area, which is considerably higher than normal. And it seems like just not long ago we were more concerned about winter kill, which was a huge issue across many of the golf courses in our region. I think this winter time we had some of the, I would say, worst stretches I can remember, not just in temperature or in snowfall, but kind of that weird combination where we had snow and ice that fell, and it actually stayed for us for about 3 weeks. I know, Rick, you might laugh at that. Pat, you may laugh at that as well. With some of the things that occur further in the upper Midwest, but in Virginia, that was pretty dramatic. We saw more snow mold than normal here in Virginia. In most cases, that kind of has already kind of petered out. I would say, though, right now, one of the surprising things that we're starting to deal with is pretty early take-all root rot, which is kind of surprising to me. I was actually in Richmond and Virginia Beach on the eastern part of the state just yesterday, kind of working with some superintendents and kind of looking at what they're dealing with. And some of the damage we're seeing even on fairways is pretty dramatic at this stage of the game. I think there's a lot of things we can kind of get into, and I'm sure we will throughout the webinar, but it's been impressive to see some of the damage so far.
Characterize that damage. What are you seeing from take-all root rot?
So a lot of the characteristic circular patches, in many cases, they've coalesced to where we have large areas that are kind of blighting out. Historically, I think of this as more of a problem on putting greens, and obviously that is going to be the case in most situations. But for us, we've got some courses in Virginia on the eastern part of the state that have really sandy soils, and their 419 fairways are loaded. And in some cases, I was seeing, isolated pockets of 50, 60, 70% of the area infected, which is substantial.
Not fun.
not fun. As a pathologist, it's great, going out taking pictures left and right. I don't think the superintendents feel the same as me, though.
Well, as I've been saying for years, plant pathologists are weird.
Agreed.
The misery of others is a great joy to plant pathologists.
Yes.
Kyle, you kind of keep your eye on everything related to disease emergence in the golf market, particularly. What have you been hearing about when seeing and what's floated up from the BASF sales team as they've been out seeing stuff as well?
Yeah, so I cover a large territory, basically the northeastern quadrant of the U.S. So Virginia up into New England and then the Midwest. I guess the first thing is that everybody that I've talked to just about says we're about 2 weeks ahead of schedule on a lot of things. I've seen plenty of damaged grass on golf courses. Some areas experience colder weather than normal. Some of them had snow then ice, or ice then snow, and I think that played into it. Snow mold, as a general rule, was significant this year. So we saw a fair amount of snow mold pressure, but I think most people were pretty well prepared. I think some of the people up in New England felt like winter hit them very quickly and they weren't quite ready for it. So yeah, definitely some big differences, with what people are saying. And you had just mentioned you had talked to Derek Settle at Chicago District Golf Association, and he does not feel like things are ahead of schedule. Whereas I'd say most of the rest of the Northeast definitely is. But I think Rick mentioned pink snow mold. I've heard about that, and some leaf spot out there. And with this warm weather, I see that one of the things that I think is keeping disease pressure down is that in a lot of areas we haven't had a lot of rain, so the relative humidity is fairly low, and so we haven't seen as much pressure as we could be experiencing this spring.
Yeah, guess what it's doing in Cleveland right now? Raining. so
well,
yeah,
we need some some out here in the east.
Yeah, it's been interesting. This past winter was, in my layman's viewpoint, I mean, winter came before Thanksgiving and it stayed, and it was dark and cold and unpleasant, and it stayed that way until a few weeks ago. So it's been a challenging one, and I'm sure a lot of people are ready to get out there and fix stuff. So let's help them. So maybe kind of talk about, Kyle, you can pick up and continue on here. How important is it to stay in front of these diseases? I hear this all the time when I'm talking to superintendents around the country. If you don't get there soon, you're going to miss it, and you're going to deal with it all year. How important is that, particularly when you're dealing with some of the turf diseases in the Northeast that I think have been the toughest on bent grass?
Well, I can tell you this, working with folks like Dr. Latin and Dr. McCall and other university folks, in my geography, probably the number one thing that I hear them say when people get into trouble with disease control is, they let it get out in front of them. They were reactive, and they weren't ready and didn't put down that first preventative application to protect them. So they were behind the 8 ball all year long. So to me, I feel like that first spray is so very important to get things sort of down to ground zero, so that they can basically, take care of the rest of the year and have a good solid spray program that's going to work for them.
Right. Rick, you're nodding. You've seen this for your entire career. Why is it so important to act?
Yeah. Well, I echo everything that Kyle said there. I like the preventative approach. I like the term reactive that Kyle used. I don't like the term curative, because to me it just means that you let the horse out of the barn already, and no fungicide will cure anything. Pathogen populations are like an iceberg, and if you see the tip of the iceberg, then you know that, or you see an outbreak, you're just looking at the tip of the iceberg, and the mass of that pathogen population is unseen. And so that's what you would be fighting for the rest of the year. One of the principles of fungicide action is that more fungicide will be required to achieve adequate disease control under conditions of high disease pressure. And large populations of the pathogen represent high disease pressure. So just like Kyle said, you let the outbreak occur, let populations get high. Unfortunately, there's a good chance to be chasing it for the rest of the year, especially with these chronic type diseases like anthracnose on greens and especially dollar spot on fairways.
Right. There's a cost to that too. It's not, we're not just talking about turf quality. We're talking about investment and what you're going to have to do along the way, and time for your people, the labor costs obviously as well. David, same thing. Why is it so important in your part of the world to get that early start?
Well, and I think you all have both already said such excellent points there. I mean, something that people need to think about is you do always have this lag time of when the pathogen is active versus when you start to see the symptom expression. And for so many things, you've got to know more basically what's happening in the soil or wherever that pathogen is going to be most active to know when it's going to start, really growing, reproducing. And that's when you need to make those well-timed applications. A perfect example of this, I think, is, BASF's Emerald fungicide. I mean, it is a phenomenal preventative dollar spot fungicide when you have it timed correctly. But then with that, if you wait a little bit too long, I think sometimes it's a little bit harder to keep things in check. If you miss that window of the best pathogen activity. I mean, fortunately, we tell people, just throw some chlorothalonil in the tank. Of course, BASF has done a great job of now coming out with Encartus, which has that exact combination there. So that's a great way to go about it. But I think that just knowing when that pathogen will first start to really grow and reproduce and making the fungicide application at that time is the most critical thing.
So give me an example. Let's say that I'm Christian Sane at the Country Club of Virginia. When does my timing feel right? What's my slot?
So that is a tricky question because I think it really varies based on the yo-yo and the things that I talked about before. And I've tried to follow growing degree.
I just
days.
wanted to
I've
work
tried
Christian into a
right.
Here, so.
Yeah, so I've tried to follow different models. I don't know that any of them are perfect, but generally speaking, I would say when soil temperatures are probably in that upper 60 range, which for us is right now.
Okay.
Christian's on here. I looked at soil temperatures for Richmond at 72 degrees. Well, probably the best time was maybe a week or so ago in that case. But I think that just really keeping a close eye on those soil temperatures is one of the most vital things you can do, because that's where those pathogens are. That's what you need to target.
Okay. What are some other indicators besides soil temperature that they should keep in mind? You always used to hear about some of the bio indicators, the flowering leaves on trees and things like that. What else do you look for?
Honestly, yes. Yeah, so the biological indicators like forsythia and things like that. Sometimes I will go by that, but in some years like this, I mean, we had everything blooming in some cases in February, and that's too early for sure. I think it's something where you really just have to keep a close eye on that 10-day forecast and see when you have that consistent kind of increase in temperatures.
Okay.
Primarily, what I would look for a lot of is kind of that nighttime temperatures. It might get to 85 degrees during the day, but if it's going to drop down to 42 degrees at night or something like that, you're probably not going to have too much activity. But when those nighttime temperatures are kind of continuously staying up in, say, the low 50s or even warmer than that, that's when I might expect to see more activity.
What do you think, Rick, from a timing standpoint? For many of the folks up north, it's about dollar spot, and it's about getting out there early. What are you hearing and seeing that would suggest when the right time would be to go out with that first key spray?
Yeah, I think you use every tool possible. I wrote a publication at Purdue. It's still there. If you Google something like seasonal activity of turfgrass pathogens, it gives a chart on when the pathogens would be active. And remember, the activity, just like David said, activity precedes symptom expression. So my goal in that was to start defining the ballpark under which these pathogens are active. And so, superintendents know, if they know the history of their of their course. They kind of know when what would be sort of normal and what would be an early year, what would be a later year, and that sort of thing. You know, some of them use their own what we call phenophase, where, you know,
Right.
okay, on the third mowing or second or third mowing, that's when I'm going to initiate my sprays. So we are definitely coming up in the Midwest, lower Midwest, and the Northeast. We're definitely coming up on decisions to be made regarding dollar spot. Certainly on greens, maybe on fairways, maybe a little bit early for that. And then really 3 weeks from now, you know, I use the old 65-degree rule for summer patch. If we're talking about POA greens, you know, in that northeast quadrant, 65 degrees seems to be that important benchmark in which we would consider making a fungicide application. And when I was at Purdue, you know, that could occur as early as May 10th and as late as June 1, you know, over my 20 years of thinking about that and watching that. So we're coming up on some important decisions now. And the whole idea of using every possible tool is to narrow that window of uncertainty that I call it. You know when it's too early, you already know when it's too late. Somewhere in there is that window, that's the optimum time to make a fungicide application. And the more information you have, the narrower that window becomes, and the more likely you are to make a very effective treatment.
How are people making that determination? That's I mean, okay, May through June sometime, but what are some things that they're going to look for to know, besides soil temperature, that they're going to look for to know this is the right time for me?
Yeah. One model that I would point out would be the Smith-Kearns model. And I think there are several benefits to that, especially with narrowing that window for that first application. I think that's where its greatest benefit is. So for dollar spot, I would never try to pinpoint my application based on a model, but I would use the model's information or knowledge to further define that window and know, you know, where exactly I am in terms of when I should spray. That and the history and superintendent's sense, that sort of thing. All important factors.
I agree. By the way, for listeners, Dr. Lattin's publication they referred to is called Turfgrass Disease Profiles, Seasonal Activity of Turfgrass Pathogens in the Midwest. And that's from Purdue. That's document BP-125-W. And you all can go Google that for yourself. So Rick, just to continue on with you for a minute. So once you've made the timing decision, particularly let's say you're in Chicago or Cleveland or Indianapolis or someplace like that. Once you've made that timing decision for cool season grasses, what are you going to try to go out with? What are you going to try to put down first, targeting which diseases?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's going to be different on different sites on the golf course. If we're talking about
let's start with putting surfaces.
Okay, so 4 diseases that I'm concerned about with the bent POA putting greens would be summer patch, anthracnose, dollar spot, and brown patch. Those 4. And, you know, there are others, of course. Leaf spot would come in there. There's some other things, the Waitea patch, that sort of thing. But I'm mostly concerned about those 4. And so when I go out, I want a fungicide that can, well, I want to prioritize, right? I definitely want to control dollar spot and summer patch and anthracnose, maybe hopefully with a single spray pick up the brown patch, but try to get a fungicide or fungicide combination that will cover all 4 diseases. And I think it's quite possible because we use contact fungicides so frequently. Maybe I'm not as much concerned about dollar spot resistance on greens, and maybe anthracnose, yes, but maybe not dollar spot resistance. On fairways, it's a different story. My main concern is dollar spot, and on those fairways, I would definitely use a combination product. I think the initial spray is maybe the most important. Get it out early. I like high rates, high label rates, okay, because I'm all about reducing pathogen populations and keeping them low. So I tend to make my application, given a certain time. Combination products are very effective, and use high rates if I possibly could. The BASF folks have a number of different products that are very effective, and one that I was particularly impressed with last year was this Aramax combination, which has a DMI plus pyraclostrobin, which is a sort of a flagship fungicide for them. So very effective, and can be, I think the price point is good and can be very good in terms of your initial application there.
Kyle, jump in there if you want to talk about, from the BASF perspective and from your perspective and seeing all the products that are out there, what sort of fits the scenario that Rick has suggested there?
Yeah, I think too, we see, more disease pressure on fairways because we're not treating as routinely. I think it's a bigger battle, at least on greens. We're out there at least every 2 weeks. So things are kept in check a little bit better. But that first spray of the year, and we normally talk about making that first spray after you've mowed a couple times, so we're responding to the turf and what it's doing. But I mean, if it stays dry, pressure is going to be lower, etc. But we like Encartus, which David mentioned, which is a combination of emerald and chlorothalonil. So, contact, plus you got a great dollar spot product. And then Rick mentioned Aramax, which is a nice broad spectrum, picks up just about any disease that you would run into. So to me, those two can fit in very, very nicely as one of your first sprays. So that would be, sort of my suggestion on things.
Makes sense. David, down south, same question. What are you trying to think about when you're thinking about the starting strong? What does it feel like a good combination of things are, and what are you attacking?
Yeah. Well, one disclaimer I'll put out here is most of Virginia, we've still got cool season putting greens. So we've, last I counted, I think we have 23 ultra dwarf courses with ultra dwarfs in the state. So a lot of things that Rick and Kyle have talked about are very similar to what we're talking about in Virginia for superintendents on their putting greens. Obviously, fairways are going to be a different story. So you're going to have many more Bermuda grass fairways here in Virginia. This time of year, we're not as concerned about fungicide applications on the fairways themselves, Bermuda grass fairways, that is. Now, when you do talk about the ultra dwarf putting greens, it is managing these things are very, very different. I have learned over the years. I mean, in cool season putting greens, bent grass or bent POA greens, we know what to expect. We know when we're going to have the spikes. We know that July and August are going to be brutal. I talked with my colleagues or our colleagues down at NC State about all the samples they receive looking at the ultra dwarfs, and it's not like you have 1 or 2 key months. You've got 12 months essentially where different things are active. Obviously, a lot of the activity you're going to see with the ultra dwarfs are going to be in the spring and the fall, kind of on those shoulder seasons where there's not a lot of activity. And when we think about kind of fungicide applications, we think about kind of setting the course up for success throughout the rest of the year. Right now, I think it is going to be getting back to going out with a strong combination product. We've mentioned quite a few good ones already with the Aramax, the Navicon, the Lexicon, where you've got dual modes of action. I love having the Insignia or the pyraclostrobin as part of the base for kind of setting that root system up for strong success throughout the year. One thing there's a lot of discussions about exactly what's happening with the pyraclostrobin, but what I have seen is whether it's impacting the root system itself or whether it's impacting a lot of those minor pathogens that may just kind of be chewing on the root system. We do see kind of that benefit when you make those applications kind of earlier in the year. So I think that's a good strategy for getting out with one of those intrinsic branded products, drenching it in, making sure you get it down in the root system for your ultra dwarf putting greens.
As you move south, and I'm going to force you out of your comfort zone a little bit, as you move farther south through the transition zone and into the southeast, and Kyle, jump in here too. How does that change? How does that outlook change as you get more into Bermuda grassland and more into ultra dwarfs as well as paspalum?
Right. So the the primary diseases we're going to be looking at on the putting greens are going to be the take-all root rot, the mini ring, spring dead spot. I feel like I'm missing a few. There's some Pythium diseases and then nematode issues. It's not the time of year to treat for spring dead spot. If you see spring dead spot in the spring, it's too late. You got to look ahead to next year. But take-all and in some cases even mini ring, I think you're going to have this little window of activity where the pathogen can be present. So really for take-all, I would think that even though I don't consider this the primary window for making those applications, I think it is a good time to make those applications for take-all to try to minimize the damage that you might see. So try to protect those roots as much as possible. Historically, we've always told people, for managing the ultra dwarf diseases, you want to wait until soil temperatures are around, roughly that 70-degree mark. Well, we've learned so much in the last decade. I think now, like the take-all root rot, your activity is like 75 to 85 degrees, maybe even higher than that. Mini ring, it's going to be warmer than spring dead spot. So you really need to have those well-timed applications throughout the course of the season, even in July in some cases.
Yeah. What do you think, Kyle? I mean, it's got to be problematic the farther south you go. It seems like it's a year-round process. You never stop trying to get ahead of the pathogen.
That is true. I think it's interesting, though, as you know, we talk about holiday spray a lot, and that goes, from the spring throughout the summer. On warm season turf, it's sort of reversed. The holiday sprays are now Halloween and Thanksgiving. Right. So it's a major adjustment with regard to when you need to be treating for some of those southern diseases. So and we're very well aware of that. And David just talked about how you go about doing that. But yeah, it's just a whole 180-degree difference.
Pat, one question here, Craig Shepard. Go ahead and ask if you'd unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question. Yeah. Maybe not. We'll come back to that.
All right, here we go.
Oh, here we go.
Can you hear me, Pat?
Yes, I can.
This is a question for the doctor. So in the Chicagoland area, I feel like for the last couple of years, summer patch and take-all patch have been really big issues on greens. In fact, I think we've set the most samples ever out in the last couple of years for these two. And the one thing that I noticed last year, and we had a lot of those same patch diseases, was almost the entire month of April, we had soil temps between 55 and 60 for almost 4 weeks straight. So that would kind of entail doing your 2 early season DMI and strobiaps. But then what happened was late May into June, we had almost another 3 to 4 week stretch of 55 to 60 degree soil temps. Would that entail doing some more soil sprays to really stop those disease, because those disease can start replicating again because of where we're at? And so that's my biggest question is, if we get those windows where we're getting them for weeks at a time, is that warrant going out with another soil spray? Thanks. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
What do you think, Rick?
Yeah. I would definitely follow it up. I mean, those pathogens actually don't grow that fast. Okay, so with the initial spray, we probably knocked down pathogen populations quite a bit, but uh, 3 weeks later, I would follow it up with another application, just to further knock down that pathogen population and allow the turf to recover. We've had the greatest success at our experiment station at Purdue against summer patch with 3 applications, starting in somewhere in around June 1, something like that. We used a 65-degree rule, but that would occur somewhere around June 1 or so on a routine basis, and then follow it up with 2 other applications at 3-week intervals. And that way, when the summer stress came, we didn't see the summer patch develop quite to the extent that it would have had we not followed up with applications. The take-all patches is a different thing, because by the time June rolls around, we should have a reduction in growth and infection by take-all. However, if you get that window where you have reduced temperatures again, right, it's going to threaten infection again. So my guess, my opinion is that select a fungicide that would affect both of those diseases, and they're very closely related. So a good fungicide against take-all patch should also be a good fungicide against summer patch. So I would start, about now, and then follow it up with another couple applications at 3-week intervals.
David, it seems like you agree there.
Yes.
Largely, any difference in the approach that you would take, assuming still on cool season turfgrass?
Yeah, the only thing I would say, and first of all, it's an excellent question. I love Rick's response, but the fungi don't care about the calendar. They don't care about what day of the month or day of the year it is. I think, in my opinion, when you've got that window of 3 to 4 weeks in May that's cooler than expected, if the conditions are favorable for pathogen development, that pathogen is most likely going to be growing. So, while, in theory, we might be past that window of kind of the prime time for pathogen activity. If the weather, and again, going back to the soil temps, if the soil temps are saying that pathogen is probably active, I would certainly hedge my bets on another application in mid to late May or so.
Okay. Kyle, what are you putting in the tank? What do you think that this calls for from a combination portfolio standpoint?
Yeah. I think the bottom line too is with these diseases, it's better to be early than late, because you're going to be seeing damage before you know it. So you need to make sure that you're adhering to the soil temperature regime, so that those applications get out, when they need to get out. So I'd say, to me, that's the most important thing to be thinking about, is that timing. And like with take-all patch, we're making applications in the fall of the year, and then also following up in the spring of the year if you've got chronic problems with it.
Yeah. Well, I love my favorite quote so far is "Fungi don't care about the calendar." I like that a lot.
Exactly.
So when you think about helping your clients out there, all the people that rely on you guys for good information, how has your definition of a really good disease management program changed over time? What are some of the key elements that you're looking for in a disease management program? And this is, I know, a very broad question, but David, what are some of the key things that you're going to make sure that folks in your area are looking to do with their overall program?
I mean, a lot of it is cover your bases, know your course, know your history, and what has been a problem on your golf course historically, and then you start to kind of build your program around that. If it is heavy in summer patch or dollar spot or whatever, you look at that pathogen and that system, and you think about, okay, when is it that this pathogen is going to be most active? Not when we're dealing with the damage the most, but when is it most active, and when do we make the key applications?
Yeah.
Again, I love the incorporating multiple modes of action with some of these dual action products that are out there, targeting where you're going to place it. Do you keep it on top? Do you water it in to move it down the root system? I think is important. That really comes back to what disease you're primarily trying to target the most.
Yep.
And then the other thing is all the cultural practices, that those things can make such a big difference. And we can spend hours talking about that, but put that plant those trillions of plants in the best position for success by keeping them happy as much as you can.
What's the one cultural practice you would recommend that people try to line up with the early start fungicide program?
For early season, let me jump to another one that I think we can start thinking about now, and turf fans. Dr. Martin always preached that's the best fungicide to come out in the turf industry in decades. One thing I'll say about that, as it relates to this, I agree with that 100%. Turf fans are the best things you can do for plant health. What I think people do too often is they wait too long to turn them on. You don't want to wait to turn these things on when you're under stress. What you want to do is you want to try to keep the root system in that optimal zone for as long as you possibly can. So as temperatures start to creep up and you're still within that nice window of a cool root system to where you can get root development, turn those things on then and let it stay at in the low 70s or upper 60s for as long as possible.
Right. How about you, Rick? How has your sort of diagnosis changed over the last 20 or 25 years that you've been watching this progression of disease and treatment, particularly on putting greens? What do you think some of the key elements are now for a good fungicide program that in 2026?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the best program begins with good agronomy. A couple of examples I'll give you is that, the trend is for reducing the height of cut and reducing the amount of nitrogen that we apply to the greens.
That's what I was thinking about, right?
They'll stay firm and they'll stay fast. And we use regulation so we can cut that low and hold back on. And so you're asking these plants that are really starved within a millimeter of its life to sustain growth, and what we're actually doing is predisposing those plants to infection. And that's one of the reasons why I think so many diseases have come to the fore, because maybe these pathogens aren't aggressive as others, but the weak plant makes them cause as much damage as possible. So that predisposition, I think, is especially on putting greens, is really important. We have great fun, and so not only does it predispose to infection, but suppose it is infected, you could put the best fungicide down, that the recovery is going to be delayed because the plants are weak. And so I often preach, increasing the nitrogen and raising the height of cut. Usually the supers can't do that, or it's not possible with the membership, but those 2 points right there, along with David's turf fans, will go a long way to reducing even diseases like anthracnose, that chronic disease that can really thin out greens. I think we can reduce the amount of anthracnose and make our fungicides work much better if we paid attention, a little bit more attention to agronomy.
Yeah. Somewhere Bruce Clark is vigorously nodding his head right now, having heard that presentation from him a million times. So Kyle, what does this suggest? And I'm going to ask you to put your BASF hat on here. What does this suggest in terms of key products and key actives, and a little bit about resistance management, some things that you want to do from a rotation standpoint? What does this suggest as people are putting together their real world program, and where does BASF fit?
My theory's always been, give the fungicide the best opportunity to be successful. And Rick and David were talking about cultural practices. So very important. I guess one other one that we could throw in there was keep low soil moisture during those months when humidity is relatively high. I remember as a teenager working on the golf course, and my superintendent was like, "Hey, I need you coming in every weekend to cool off greens." And I was like, "We need to water those greens. They look stressed." He said, "We're not watering, we're cooling them off, because giving them too much water, we were just encouraging more disease." I didn't really get it back then. I get it now. Let me just say that. But and the other thing too is I do go back to the starting early, because, and David mentioned it about a product like Emerald. Very slow to give you that initial residual sort of control. And I remember when we launched it back in 2003, we had some situations where it didn't look like any dollar spot was there, but a few days later we had some dollar spot. And then a week later it was totally clean. And so once again, the idea of making sure you're out before you see the damage is very, very important. That inoculum is sitting down there in the soil ready to pounce. So, that's something that I definitely talk about a lot. Rotating chemistry, I mean, that's fundamental. The other thing to me too is with these spray programs, we sort of get them locked in, and then, the pressure might be very, very high. We need to adjust our spray interval dependent on the amount of pressure we're getting at the time. So let's say on fairways, we're normally on a 3-week interval. We may need to ratchet back to a 2-week spray interval to give that fungicide the very best chance it can to be successful. And then lastly too, I don't want to lose sight of this, even though we're talking about spring diseases, is we need to make sure we're protected late into the year so that the next spring we don't have all this extra inoculum in the soil that is just going to jump out of the ground early on and cause problems for us. So the importance of those late season sprays is also there for cool season turf.
I think I would encourage everybody to look at the holiday spray program, which is a kind of a fun name for a planning tool, and sitting down and thinking, okay, how does this apply to me, and how do I plan out when I'm going to put down my anchor applications for the year, those foundational products that are going to make all the difference for me. So that's the one thing I always point people to is that's a great planning tool if you're ever doubting what your process is. That's a great place to start.
Yeah, we've got volumes of research to demonstrate that insignia component that's in so many of our products really can help the turf. It's going to give you a much stronger root system that can get you through those stressful periods. So yeah, it's core to what we do.
Right. And where does plant health fit in, Kyle? I mean, that's been something that's been, I will say it, intrinsically part of the BASF program for a long time. How does that fit?
Yeah, well, we're always going to lead with great disease control. And, our feeling is, in addition to that, you're going to get these secondary benefits. Plant health being, the secondary benefit that we see with these insignia-based products. It's basically is what's going on is it's slowing down respiration in the plant, and that extra energy we're funneling down to the root system. So we've got deeper, thicker, more profuse rooting, more secondary roots, which gives rise to a lot of, benefits to that turf plant. So very, very important. For folks that haven't tried Lexicon or Navicon, it's a game changer. It's a game changer.
I wrote an article a few years ago called Love Letters to Lexicon, because I talked to so many superintendents for whom that was the thing that allowed them to go on vacation in the summer, or the thing that allowed them to go to their kids' soccer games. It was more than just a chemical component to the process. So,
Sure.
And by the way, why am I not the least bit surprised that as a teenager you were arguing with your superintendent that you were working for?
Yeah.
That's very, very much Kyle.
Pretty normal.
So okay, so David, when you think about pulling this together and making the case for early start based on data, not based on whether the trees are flowering necessarily or what date it is on the calendar, what are the couple of three most important things you want to let people know about getting that good early start?
Again, it goes back to knowing specifically which diseases are going to be a problem at your golf course. Know what they are, and then take a step back and look at when you have that pathogen activity. Look at when you need to make that targeted application so that the populations do not get out of control. You catch them at the right time. For a lot of people, that window was last week. A lot of people in, especially the upper Midwest, that's coming a week or two down the road from now. So pay attention now. Look to see what you need to do for your particular course. Look at your diseases, and then plan accordingly based on that.
Great. Rick, what do you think? What's your best advice?
Yeah, I think David said it all. I would echo that. The only other thing I can add with an exclamation point would be, don't wait until the outbreak occurs.
Yeah. It's counterintuitive, but that's what you got to do.
Yeah, think about the iceberg.
Well, no, tell us about the iceberg.
Well, it's the whole thought that if you see an outbreak, it's like the tip of the iceberg, and the mass of the iceberg is unseen. So that's that population just sitting there waiting for the conditions to continue and continue to infect and damage turf.
Thank you. Kyle, last words. What do you want to make sure people remember from this concept of early start?
Yeah, I think one of the important things is be flexible with your spray program. I feel like you're going to need to adjust on the way, depending on the pathogens that are sort of jumping onto your turf grass different times of the year. So you're going to need to make adjustments as you go along, and that might mean you're going to need an extra spray, or it could mean you can get away with one less spray. But be flexible.
I'm just gonna share here quickly, if I can. No, I can't. Never mind. I was going to share a couple of Kyle's slides, but I'm unable to do that. So let's wrap things up here. I would encourage anybody who's listening, if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to any of the docs here, but also feel free to reach out to your local sales rep, DSR, and of course, any of the BASF turf reps that are out there. Ask those questions. Try to find out what other people are doing. This is a small, wonderful business full of friends. Never be afraid to ask other friends for advice and find out what they're doing. So with that, I want to thank Dr. Rick Ladden. Good to see you again.
Yeah.
And glad you're enjoying yourself there in Pinehurst. And David, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And good luck to you as yet another season takes root. Kyle, again, why am I not surprised you were telling your superintendent what to do in high school? So with that, we'll wrap this up. Thank you so much for attending. And again, this is just a start, but we do encourage you to think about how you're going to get that quick start and get going now. Cheers.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.